Hey folks, it's Josh here. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about some scary music for the piano. We're going to go over some various examples of genres of horror music. And I'll give you guys 5 techniques to compose some of these concepts, some things to keep in mind, and then some melodic ideas that you guys can mine to scare your friends. All right, so let's get started with 5 different genres, or 5 different ways to play horror music. The first one I want to start off with is the dark sort of sound of horror. And I chose the Michael Myers theme from the famed Halloween series. Here's a little bit of how that goes. Ooh, haunting. All right, another kind of horror, which is not as common, but it's out there. It's sort of a romantic kind of horror, and it usually uses the vernacular of the late romantic period of music. And one score that comes to mind is a score by John Williams that was released in 1979 named Dracula, starring Frank Nagella and Sir Laurence Olivier. So here's a little bit of Dracula. All right, so another kind of horror, which is a cliche of the horror genre, is the childlike horror. And this typically is written in a sort of like majory key, lullaby-esque. And composers tend to always stick a kid's voice singing on a la-la on this. So one example of a theme would be Carol Ann's theme from Poltergeist, written by one Jerry Goldsmith. And this one's sort of written in that sort of Berceuse lullaby-esque manner. And I'm going to attempt to sing along so you guys can get an idea of how creepy this should be. Forgive me. Here we go. La 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 la. All right, again, apologies for that. Another kind of horror genre is the one that Danny Elfman made a staple on, and that's sort of like the quirky kind of horror. This particular selection I chose is a kind of a deep cut for all you older folks who might know it. This is from an old television show from the early 90s, Tales of the Crypt. And Danny Elfman, there are a whole bunch of composers who wrote for this particular show, but he created the main title music, and it's very emblematic of his style at that time. So here is the theme from Tales from the Crypt. Right? Okay. And the last example I wanted to pick was something that sort of alluded to a sort of time and place. And I chose Ben Wallfisch's cue from It, called Every 27 Years. And with this, he sort of writes this melody shifting in different keys, which we'll talk about in a second. It sort of evokes a sort of Chopin-esque mazurka kind of sound. And here's what I mean. All right, so on to the techniques and sort of how to build these interesting melodies and harmonies. The first, there are 5 techniques we're going to talk about. The first one I want to talk about is the use of dissonant intervals. And the most common dissonant intervals would be minor seconds, major sevenths, minor ninths, and the tritone. I played a major seventh with that Dracula example, right? But let's talk about that minor second interval, shall we? The most common scary theme that uses the minor second is Williams's score theme to Jaws. So, just to expand the dissonant interval out beyond the minor second of the Jaws theme, we have the Twilight Zone theme, which not only incorporates the minor second, but major seconds and tritone intervals as well. Very, very scary, very dissonant, and just imagine like an old school guitar kind of thing with those little horn hits kind of things underneath that. Very, very spooky. Now, let's get even more advanced. Let's expand this out even further with the theme from Psycho, particularly the prelude. Now, there's this concept that a lot of composers, Bernard Herrmann, Jerry Goldsmith, even folks like Bartók, Bela Bartók, he uses this technique called set theory. So bear with me, let me try to explain a little bit of it. So they number a chromatic scale. Let me play the chromatic scale here. I want to play it from C to B. All right? And we number this chromatic scale. All right? And then you can build sort of like chord blocks. You can choose which numbers that you want to incorporate in your piece. And hence, you create a set of pitches. So let's say, using this chromatic scale that I have here, I want to use 0, 3, 7, and 11. So here's 0, 3, 7, 11. Or I can use 4, 5, 8, and 10. So you can create these little crunchy chords all you want. Now the 0 will be whatever sort of tonal center you want to make it. So using the Psycho prelude as an example, my 0 in this case is using the key of B flat, either B flat or major or minor. So that will be my 0. And Bernard Herrmann uses the set of 0, 6, 7, 10, and 11. Now he'll rearrange in which order those will be played, but that's the set of pitches that he likes to use. And there's the popular element of the prelude is, so that's 4, 11, 10, and 6. And then I'll play the B flat as a pedal for now. All right, so let me play an example of the prelude, just a snippet of it, so you can see this set in action. All over the place in that prelude. Give it a good listen sometime later if you can. All right, so another technique that you can use is this technique called Bi-Tonality. So that is where we combine 2 different chords from 2 different keys. I like to use Jaws as an example. So we talked about it melodically and how it evokes sort of that dissonant interval. Williams decides to, after the shark is moving along and the sea, going after his victim, he decides to harmonize it. And he harmonizes it using Bi-Tonality. So you have this kind of a weird chord of like E minor and E flat dominant 7th. And then he'll have that going up and down like so. I also like to think of Stravinsky and his Petrushka chord, and that has a sort of interesting relationship where you play one chord, a major chord, let's say C major, and then you play another chord, a tritone away, which is F sharp, where you can play them at the same time. Bi-tonality. You want it nice and crunchy. Next would be shifting keys, and here we can modulate from one key to the next in the most uncommon way. So very common modulations or transpositions is where you go to keys that are closely related to it. So like if we're in F major, a closely related key would be D minor or B flat major. But if you want to make something real spooky and unexpected, try to go to some distant related keys. So an example of that would be chromatic medians. This is a lot of film composers use. Most commonly they would go a key that's a major third away. So we're F major, and the major third away would be. But oftentimes they would go from a key that's a minor third away. So let's say I have E minor, which I have written here, going to G minor. You keep going. Keeps them on their toes and, you know, spooked, hopefully. Another kind would be a tritone relationship. And I've sort of mentioned that previously with that Petrushka example, with the C major and F sharp major. But you can do that with minor chords. F minor to B minor. Ooh. And I want to mention some extended techniques. This is our third, so or fourth sort of technique that you can use. We mentioned dissonant intervals, bi-tonality, shifting keys with those chromatic variants and tritone relationships. And then here we can use extended techniques to sort of really enliven the texture. So one kind of technique, especially if you have an acoustic piano, especially in a baby grand, or if you're lucky, a grand piano, you can sort of play inside the strings, pluck them if you want. You can get a mallet, which is commonly used for marimbas or whatever, and you can sort of hopefully safely strike the strings with that to sort of give that dark sound. There's also a technique called prepared piano. This was something that was spearheaded by the great trailblazing composer John Cage in the mid-20th century. And this is where you put nuts and bolts and rubber bands in the piano, acoustic piano, not in digital, okay, because you would be in trouble if you did it on digital. And it creates a sort of otherworldly effects, sort of percussive, sort of gamelan, gong-like sounds, which can be very, very useful. Jerry Goldsmith, whom we talked about earlier in regards to Carol Ann's theme, he uses a lot of prepared piano in scores like Planet of the Apes and Chinatown. And then we have a lot of techniques we call portamento or Liszt strings. Really hard to do on the piano. You can do this, but you usually do that as sort of like a flourish on, like, at the end of a phrase. Not spooky. But on strings, you know, it can get really, really gnarly. One example would be, again, from the Bernard Herrmann score Psycho. We have the famous murder scene, the shower scene, which has these weird chords in there, but the strings are doing these quick glissandos. But just imagine if you're a string player going, ring, 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 just to give it that very, very frightening sound. The last technique I want to talk about is something that you can do on a piano, acoustic or digital, and that is the concept of the tone cluster. And you want to find, there's a notation here, you can see it's like a block. And that is because there are no discernible or discernible pitches that you can play on the keyboard. So you can play them high, You can play them low. You can roll them around a little bit like that. You can play black keys only, white keys only. There are certain indications in some scores where they ask the pianist to play them with palms, fists, shucks, I've seen elbows. But usually a dark rolling chord, a cluster, does the trick. All right, so one of our last techniques would be dealing with rhythm. So we can apply this in different ways. One example is to write an atypical time signature. So common time signatures would be 4/4, 3/4, 2/4, 2/2. But a nice, interesting time signature would be that of a 7/8 or a 5/4. That Michael Myers example that I played before is a great example of a 5/4 rhythm. I'll play just again a snippet of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you, hopefully, although this theme is very old, so everyone's heard it, but just imagine back in the late 70s when this film came out, audiences were creeped out by that high piano lick and this weird, sort of lugubrious 5/4 time signature. So like, where's the downbeat? Ah, Michael Myers is waiting around that corner for you to find it, and up, get you. Another example would be something rather steady, sort of a steady rhythm. And that is with that sort of Tales from the Crypt theme. So I have that melody. Very common for a Danny Elfman melody. But behind that, the accompaniment is sort of like the steady movement from D minor to B flat dominant 7. Bop, 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 bop. So something steady, so that gives it that sort of drive toward the victim. Ooh. And then last but not least, let's throw some spice into this and let's have a tempo that fluctuates. Now, Williams in his theme to Jaws does this expertly in the sense that he likes to give a sense of distance in relation to the victim with how fast or slow he plays the theme. So you can play it slow, or faster. Now, it was a clever technique to use for that film specifically. The reason why is that they didn't have a working shark. They couldn't see the shark in the film. This was just pretty damaged. So Williams had to cover the scares of that film with how fast or slow he played that theme, just to give the audience a sense of danger. Play with those a little bit, and I'm sure you can come up with something spooktacular.
Hey, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the lesson, be sure to check out pianowithjohnny.com. We have over 1,000 step-by-step lessons for all playing levels, where you'll learn your favorite songs, styles, and how to improvise at the piano. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.